Okay, so Starfield. I finished Starfield Sunday morning. I played it on very hard. I probably did about 60 to 80 hours in the game. I forgot to check. And I do want to talk about the game, but I do kind of want to talk about like the culture of new games and how quickly people make snap judgment on stuff. Because Starfield's a game where I don't think necessarily they did the best previews of it coming out. They show people landing on a planet, scanning a creature, mining some minerals, and then they just showed you sort of a generic base where you jump around your jetpack and you shoot people and all these things. But I maybe understand that they don't want to have too many spoilers and leave the game to be something that people can discover and understand. But I think they really sold it short to some degree, and especially considering a summer like this where like the post-COVID development uh, pipeline is really coming together, and to get the Baldur's Gate 3 into Starfield, now into Cyberpunk, which came out a few days ago, um, I think just generally speaking, as someone who is streaming this game, when streaming Baldur's Gate 3, you watch the viewer count obviously and necessarily go down, not for the whole category, go down over time as the people run out of interest for a game. Starfield didn't even really compare to Baldur's Gate 3 in that degree. But with the way the games come out nowadays, with some bugs and some things need to be ironed out, which is understandable. You get hundreds of thousands of people playing a game. Obviously, you're going to find stuff that the Q&A department wouldn't. But it seems like people are pretty easy to make snap judgment on a game and think it's buggy. People kind of like to pile on Bethesda a little bit for what their game style is like, and it being sort of janky just because of the sheer ambition that a lot of their games have. But it seemed to me that it wasn't until such a point that the entire, like, oh, no, this is a generalization, but it wasn't to such a point that a large majority of sort of like the game's media and people who are following on Twitch, etc., had kind of moved on from the game. It wasn't until that point, like two and a half weeks in, where the game even really just started to take shape for me. Do you know what I mean? There is a main story. People say you can finish it in 30, 40 hours. It's pretty cool, and it's basically encapsulates the main structure of the game. But the real beauty of the game is in two things. It's one, a lot of like the faction storylines go in a lot of great directions and give you way more of a sense of the universe, well, the galaxy, than the main storyline does. And also just the sheer size of the game, realizing that it's not as bland as people were ragging on it for. Like, oh, there's all these planets, but they're all procedurally generated, and there's nothing really there, and it's all just empty. And what, you can't even just land on a planet from space, go through the atmosphere, then get up and fly wherever you want on the planet, and fly out again? Like, I think a lot of the ways that people set up the narrative of what this game is like, I think really short sells what a technical achievement it is. This game is crazy. When you dock on a star station, you can look out the window and see where your ship is docked. All the things that you saw floating around out there are still there. Like, the sheer amount of options, the sheer amount of little storyline moments you have, all the little people you can encounter, there is a lot here. And it wasn't until I got to the city of Neon and was doing the Freestar Ranger quest, where you're basically like a sheriff in the Old West to some degree, it's when I started to really, really have fun with it. You can do a lot. There is a lot here. So I think that a game like this, there's even interviews where they've said as much, where this is a game that's similar to other Bethesda games, but especially following the ring of Skyrim. You have people who play this for a very, very, very long time, and it's something that you can play for a long time. You can play this game without finishing it, similar to Elder Scrolls Skyrim, for a really, really, really long time, probably way longer than Skyrim even, and get a ton out of it and have a lot of fun with that. But it's just, it takes some time to start really, really enjoying it. I know some people sometimes use that as like a defense of a game, be like, oh, just wait, or a show, wait for this long before it starts to get good. And that's usually a sign that something isn't really that good. But something like this is a world you definitely get to live in. The amount of ships you can have, the fact that you can build a ship whatever way you want, for whatever parts you want, and just then watch it function as a ship in these cutscenes as it takes off and lands, or watch as a ship that you built fire up the engines. This is an amazing technical achievement. I really, really do think it is. And it does a very good job of being... It takes notes from a ton of different sci-fi sources. Oh, sorry, getting dark. It takes notes from a ton of different science fiction sources without really being too beholden to any of them. Like, you can see The Expanse in there, you can see Dune in there, you obviously can see Star Trek and Star Wars, etc. A lot of different stuff, and that's a little Galactica. You can see all these influences, but it really does own its own aesthetic. And I just have to say that I had a great time with this game. I really did. I didn't think about it. I didn't wake up in the morning thinking about it the same way I did Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 was such like a deep tactical game in terms of like items and equipment, skill customization. This game's not really like that. It's still like essentially a Bethesda game in those ways. Like a little bit silly in all the one-to-one interview cutscenes. Battle is battle, you know what I mean? You run around shooting stuff. You can run around punching stuff if you want, or whatever you want, but it's not terribly complicated in that way. But it's like the fantasy is great. This is very, very open-ended. Again, like Baldur's Gate 3, don't spend too much time looting in this game, especially because if you choose to end the game in the way they say to end the game, which basically leads into New Game Plus, and then suddenly you've spent hours upon hours looting all these resources, and then if you walk into the light at the end of that game, you don't get to use those again unless you go back to a different save. So, yeah, be careful with how you deal with the ending, and don't spend too much time looting unless you really do think you're going to spend a ton of time making outposts and making ships and doing all these things. It just depends on the kind of player you are. But games like this, I think, suspect with Cyberpunk coming up next, I'm going to feel the same issue because I remember playing Cyberpunk before. For someone who has like a ADD type personality, looting in games like this, they're just giving you the option, but sometimes it doesn't feel like an option. It feels like I'm spending so much time getting all this stuff, and then eventually you don't even necessarily really need it. Most of the best weapons and the best equipment in this game you get from the ends of quest lines. I think only 1 or 2 of the legendary class weapons that I ended up using were ones that I looted or stole. There's a great pistol. It's like a 6-shooter revolver that you can steal from the Neon security office. You should definitely steal that if you're using pistols. That was my favorite gun in the entire game. I had a lot of fun with that. So, I'm not going to get too much into the details of this, but I just want to really talk about the fact that this game takes a little bit of time to have you appreciate the sheer freedom and liberty and the just massive amount of options that are out there. And it's really good. It's a game that I think a lot of people moved on past. I know there's a lot of people who love it. They put 6 days into already. They'll make a million ships to do all these things, but it is a really, really great world to go into and spend time in. The art, like in terms of the rendered objects and the overall aesthetic of the game, look at the posters on the walls, look at the clothing people have. It's terrific. It is absolutely top tier. The music is incredible as well. Incredible. Perfect ambient atmospheric music without being overwhelming. Maybe not enough songs, generally speaking, but overall, terrific. I like the companions. It felt good to have companions that were your buddies. They talk to you too much, honestly. There's too many times when you get a little level up in relationship status that they want to have another interminable 8 or 10 lines of dialogue talking about their lives. They're all sensitive. They're all hurt. They're all blah, blah, blah. Okay, enough. I liked Andreja. Andreja was like the toughest cookie of all of them. But even she has her moments where she's like, I just need to tell you about my past. It hurts and I'm sensitive. They're all like that. I do find a lot of dialogue in the game just kind of goes over my head. Maybe I'm getting spoiled by the dialogue history function in Baldur's Gate 3. But a lot of times I'm like, what do I answer? Like, what were they just talking about? So I would not necessarily give it top marks for dialogue all the time, but the aesthetic of this game is incredible. This is an extremely fun world to play around in, and it's like one of the best examples I've got in a long time, if not the best example, of people sort of being like, oh lol, it's a buggy Bethesda game. They're always like this. and moving on pretty quickly onto the next thing, onto Cyberpunk, onto whatever the things people are excited about next. But this is sick. The guns, the modular space design, the music, the look of these planets, especially the cities, they've done all of this from scratch. This is a new world. All of this is like fresh and original. I'm really, really impressed. I will say though that it took me a long time to get to that point. And part of it is that especially with insisting on playing on very hard, there was a ton of times in the first like 15, 20 hours where I'm resetting, I'm reloading, I'm doing something like, especially the dogfights. The dogfights I don't know about that. The amount of time that you can spend time in battle recalibrating your weapons. The fact that it's pretty hard to get a sense of who's behind you and how to like track someone who's behind you shooting you. The sheer impossibility, essentially, of fighting a number of ships at once where one of them's always hitting you. The dogfights, clearly, you can always improve on them and be better and smarter, but it basically just turned out to be, anytime I was outnumbered, I would just do loop-de-loops around a large asteroid until such a point that it kind of worked out in my favor that I could isolate one, take one out, and take one out, and take one out. The dogfights I have a pretty mixed opinion of. It's a pretty cool look and a pretty cool experience, but I don't think strategically or tactically I'm finding it very, very satisfying. If you want to just appreciate the beauty of this game and to play around with it without much hurry, without much like urgency, this is a great experience. I could go into more details, I think, for sure, of what things I like. Some of the artifacts, the fact that you get these certain power-ups after you find artifacts in these temples, but then the little pattern you do to get each power is always sort of the same. I thought that was strange. It is just, I do want to say to some degree that it is kind of empty. If I want to think about the strengths of this game, it's like the engineering behind it. Not only the fact that the game is a real technical marvel and a huge upgrade to what Bethesda has been about, but also just the way the guns look, the way the ships look, clothing, having different apparel on, spacesuits. There's a lot about it that is like a really, really amazing art design achievement. And I'm gonna basically leave it at that point. But take your time with this one, for sure. This is not like a rush through the storyline and let it go game. If you do that, you're underselling it, and I think you're underselling yourself. So if you have time to get out there and feel like you have a real sense of your character in space, and to think of yourself as like, what kind of guy is this guy? Is he like a bounty hunter? Are you a smuggler? Are you like a rules follower? What kind of guy you are? Those kind of things really make a big difference. And again, do the UC Vanguard and the Freestar Ranger quest pretty early on, unless you want to put a huge amount of money into making your own ship, which is also very cool. But I would kind of wait on that until you have enough bank to really do it, because that takes a few $100,000. And then let me know what you did with UC Sistef versus the Crimson Fleet and that quest line, because I have some very mixed feelings about how that went for me. Anyway, enjoy that, appreciate the beauty of it. I think it was really fun. Bye. Oh, look at you. Look at you.